Good afternoon, good day, good evening, wherever you're at. Hope it's all good. So today, quite often we do have a topic that I talk on, and this particular time we're going to do what I call, we conventionally call mountains and rivers, or questions from Sangha. And so I think sometimes that works very well, just to, if I go off on a topic or a subject, sometimes there are questions that don't get addressed, and you may, through your practice during the week or during your study, through the various book studies we do and so on, you may have some questions. So that, and sometimes that's the Q&A part of it is can be very very helpful for you and for me, so I can understand, learn at the same time that you do. So please let me have them. Or we can just sit here. Sokuzan.
Last week, during your talk on things arising by themselves,
Yes,
you said inside and outside is a misunderstanding. So where do things arise?
so the first assumption there is that things arise. So, but that's not what you're asking me is, do things arise? You're asking me where they arise?
It's something like how.
How do they rise?
How or and where and.
Which one? Simplify it for me. I'm not very quick.
I started with where, so
okay.
I'll stick with that.
Yeah. So they aware they arise as we're aware that they're arising, and then we attribute, or we blame, or we praise, or we whatever. We actually decide spontaneously, depending on the shape of the form or the particular causation that's rising up in terms of what it triggers over here, if it triggers anything. So fundamentally things don't arise, but it sure looks like they do. So as far as location, that location, we also divide that up just outside, inside, because quite often we think something's arising out there. Somebody's being mean to us, and we're having emotions about it, but actually the emotions are arising in our own mind stream. So it could be, you could say, to break it down in a relative say, you could say, that's triggering this. So I often say, no one comes up to you, no matter how difficult, how disrespectful, or even abusive they treat you. I'm not letting them off the hook. Don't misunderstand me here. But the emotions you have are yours. And when I say yours, they are in that particular mind stream, which is a mind stream, but is without a self, is without a solid, separate identity from everything else. So it gets very challenging and confusing, brings up fear. And so then we scramble for some kind of a reference point. Quite often the reference point is they did this to me. And not that they didn't do something, but what you feel about it may not be exactly what was even intended by that other situation or person. More if you have it, Sokuzan.
Sokuzan bowing. So is the apparent other, or what is outside, apparently, is that just dependent on causes and conditions?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And bowing, how does that arise?
Well, cause and effect. This bump that makes this show up, that goes down, this comes up, this changes color, this changes shape, and it's just the 10,000 things are coming and going and coming and going. And the self-centeredness, or the assumption of a self, or the belief in a self, or in the Yogacara tradition would be the seventh consciousness that is paranoid about what's happening, hope and fear. And so that does the positioning, any kind of accusation or any kind of assumption about it's from over here, or it's because of this, it's because of that. We see it all over the place. something shows up and people have different ideas about what that is. And they, because of fear, because of hope, they will lock down on some aspect of it, which stops any investigation, stops any inquiry into what it is. It's called an opinion. Opinions are, sometimes we just have things that function like opinions, like, but it's actually, it's still some kind of clamping down on something to say, this is what it is. A conclusion is another. I say don't conclude, include. If you include, then you're more, you're kind of in the dark. Being in the dark is the only way there can be anything that you would refer to as light. More, please.
So going bowing, do things arise randomly?
It looks that way, but not. It looks random because of the way we separate things into parts and pieces. This is coming, now that's showing, and now this is coming from over here, and then this moves, and then this turns blue, and that turns red, and then both of them, all their color gets bleached out by the sun, on and on and on. It's just a constant stream of this and that, this and that, and this and that help us shore up the very, very shaky nature of the identity, or the discontinuous factor, or in factors in the identity that is imaginary. So it looks that way, but that's a particular kind of word that means well, it's just random. It's kind of it's random. I would say, from the point of view of what random is defined as, and I don't have a Webster's in front of me, but that's probably just a way of concluding something about things without investigating. We want a position. Have you noticed? We want a position on it. We want to know, and we don't want to know ultimately. Maybe eventually we do, but at first we just want to know conceptually: is this true? Is this not true? And that's a good way to start. Whatever shows up in the mind, say, is that true? This is what Byron Katie taught in her from her spontaneous realization back 35 years ago. She wasn't a meditator. She was a spontaneous realizer, which there are few and far between of those. Further questions?
Jim Bowing.
Yes.
When you said to ask, is it true?
Yes.
What do we a standard or qualities to determine if it's true?
Yeah. Don't set up standards. Don't set up any standards. There are standards that are things that are operating as standards, and there are standards that you don't even know you have, that are just assumptions about things, that as soon as something shows up, the assumption shows up today. So I wouldn't do anything with it. As long as you're a meditator, as long as you're practicing training the mind, whether it's Shini and Laktung or Shikantaza or some other kind of mindfulness practice. As long as you're doing something to train your mind to see more clearly, and that may show up in lots of different ways, depending on the teacher, the teaching, the lineage, the whatever dynamic. But as long as there's you're endeavoring to sharpen or clarify, see deeply into whatever's arising, rather than contemplate it in the sense of thinking about it or coming to conclusions about it, of good and bad, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, this and that. So just train your mind. Further question if you had it. Junchu.
Sometimes when a story comes up in my head and I think it's true, if it comes up against a situation that I'm actually looking at, it's obvious that that's not what's happening.
Yes.
When those stories come up and they don't have a reality to come up against, how can I see that those stories are not true? Persist, but don't look for the fault. Don't look for falsity. Don't look for truth. Just look at what it is. What is it? What question? Why questions will cause you to go in circles. You may have some kind of relative truth showing up. This is how science works. A materialistic science. Why? Because. Why? Because of this. Why is this moving this? Because of that. Why is that happening? Why is this? Why? Spend your whole life doing why. You're going to get PhDs in the PhD in why. I mean, you can. I mean, it depends on the discipline, but you can get that, and you can get
big credentials for it. But what is this? A little bit different. Even physicists, and I'm not a physicist by any means, of course, but even physicists, when they go down into the fundamental nature of relative truth, they run up against difficulty when the size gets very, very tiny. Like we've probably all read a little bit about this. I know I've read very little, but particles and waves. Is it something, or is it just some kind of a vibration or frequency? So it gets into, when we get down into that subatomic area, or when we go out and into the vastness of what is this? I say, look at the dirt, look at the ground, look at the carpeting. Now go outside and look up. You want to see a contrast? That's a really big contrast. That should let you know a little bit about how limited our situation is of knowing a pine tree from an oak. We conclude, I know things about trees. Not wrong, do that. But why is circular? Why? Because. Why? I'm not discounting the value of why and because. Of course not. We need some of that. But for the spiritual path, we might need to use that to start with. Why is there suffering? Because we want something else. It's the first and second noble truth. And then the third one, of course, is just doesn't have to last. You don't have to keep, it can come to an end. What comes to an end is quite a bit different than what we think is going to come to an end. And then, of course, the last of the Four Noble Truths of the 2,500 year old teaching, the sage of the silent sage of the Sakyas, who actually talked quite a bit. He said, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, or discipline, meditation, knowledge. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement, and see the truth. Simply put, it just takes most of your life to be able to do that. Maybe all of your life. Maybe you'll never understand. As Nagarjuna said in the 2nd century, you may attain enlightenment, you may not. What a sense of humor he had.
Shivali, what is the difference between functioning out of belief in our stories and not functioning out of that?
Yeah, all you have to do is see the belief. Even though I say, don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't look away. Those are the 3 poisons, basically, in terms of one's functioning in terms of attitude or producing anything. Reception, production. So if something happens, just notice the degree of attachment there is. If there's a belief in that being actually real, whether it's a thought pattern or a deer running across your yard, belief, disbelief. And I'm not against the belief, but when I say don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't ignore, I know you can't help but do that. I do it constantly. But being very aware of a movement of the consciousness in terms of affirming something, denying something, or shutting something out. Being, as long as there's blood moving, food going in, coming out, that's going to happen. You're Anuvira Samyak Sambodhi, complete unexcelled realization without anything else. Complete. Samyak. Complete. Even if you realize that, you're still going to have emotions coming and going. They just don't occur to a person anymore. And if they do occur to a person, then what happens there, which they may, because that personhood may still show up every 3.5 days to yell in your ear. But you don't believe it, you don't disbelieve it, you don't look away. No more ignorant, no more ignoring anything. You don't see anything that isn't your heartbeat. You don't see anything, anywhere that isn't the Buddha. Everything is preaching the Buddha's Dharma. Not separate, not separate, not separate. Everywhere. Everything is dependently arisen. There's not a single solid separate thing anywhere. Don't believe a word I say, but you could consider it. You could take it to the wall, sit down, train your mind to see clearly. So you don't need my teaching. You don't need anybody's opinion about anything. You don't need proof of anything. You see it. I always say, if I taught out of what I was taught, I wouldn't be doing this. But that being said, I needed those situations in order to continue to go further, to step out into thin ice. I needed that structure. I needed the 12 links on the chain of existence. I needed to understand that. I needed the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. I needed the 3 realms, the 6 realms. I needed that kind of a dynamic, solid teaching so that I could begin to examine the nature of the consciousness that arose as as this experiencer.
Sokuzan, we have 2 questions in the chat box.
Could you read them, please?
Yep. First one is from Elizabeth.
Yes.
But in a society with great injustice and violence, how can or do we hold people accountable?
Hold yourself accountable. Train your mind. It's obvious. You can look all over and there's insanity everywhere and intense polar warfare. It's been going on. I always use the Peloponnesian Wars as an example of this. Hasn't changed much because it's 2,500 years ago, about the time the Buddha was alive. Go read. You don't have to read much. Read a little bit about it and see. There was a plague then. There were people being murdered. There were people being imprisoned and enslaved, and there were armies fighting each other. Those people are gone. On the other hand, they're not. They're right here. Same dynamic is happening. Nothing is separate. Lysander, back in 2,500 years ago, is here today. Who is he? I'm not going to tell you. You figure it out. On second thought, don't figure anything out. Figuring is circular. Don't figure it. I mean, if you're forced to figure by gunpoint, then you might want to figure for a while. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if causes and conditions put you in a situation where I got to figure this out, well, I would spend more time figuring it out than I would saying to myself, I got to figure this out. That's a waste of time. Don't waste time. Next question.
Sokuzan, this is from William Murray.
William.
Is the consciousness in one body the same as the consciousness in another?
Who says it's in a body? I didn't say that. But consciousness doesn't belong to anyone. This doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of a connection that is happening that enters an organism that operates in terms of the eye organ and that aspect of the mind that we call consciousness, or even in the thinking process. Sure, there's something going on there. But as far as the attribution of some kind of singularity that is going from one lifetime to the next, not happening. I'm not saying there isn't lots of lifetimes. And I'm not saying there isn't the illusion that we're going from one lifetime to the next. And that illusion is incredibly powerful. People actually believe that. I don't believe it, nor do I disbelieve it. But I don't ignore it either. I work with past lives all the time. I'm working with them right now. We've met many, many times. Here we are again. Here we are again. If you don't know what I'm saying, let's go into it. I'll help you. We'll do it together. We'll do it mutually. If you ask the question, then I can respond. If you don't ask questions, I don't know much what to say.
Sokuzan bowing. On what you just responded to William, you said the consciousness isn't in the form of the body. But you also say the first precept of the lineage is consciousness finds its own form.
I do.
So what is finding a form that isn't?
It might be a ghost in an abandoned warehouse. Are there ghosts? I don't know. Something shows up there pretty regularly in different ways that doesn't actually have a physical form, but thinks it does. If you don't have any experience of that, it's out there. It's all over the place. So more, Sokuzan, go ahead.
When you say consciousness finds its own form, is that form an immateriality?
And immateriality?
Like a material situation with boundaries.
Yeah. But it isn't necessarily the material that you assume is like a tabletop. You have the discontinuity of forms right in your own room. The incense that's going up like smoke, you can't knock on that. You can knock on this, but you can't really interrupt this, but you can interrupt the smoke. So this doesn't stop at this in terms of solidity, or that in terms of being immutable. It continues. There aren't any boundaries for that. And ultimately, they're not different. Ultimately, Sandokai, the equality of sameness and difference, consciousness only. I know. I think it's funny too. More, please.
She's unbowing.
Yes,
The
sir.
second tenet is the form consciousness finds as full as it is and empty as it appears. What does it mean for a mundane phenomenon to be full, bowing?
It could be full of of the appearance of a rock, the appearance of it's completely convincing to whatever perception is involved in receiving that appearance. So the two are not separate. So there actually is no appearance other than the on the reception end of it, and you can only receive if something is producing. Let's go.
She's unbowing. When something arises, it feels like I only see one thing, which is the self-centeredness that arises or what gets triggered. So is there a perception that's being missed? Bowing?
No, it's not being missed. The perception is not being missed. It's misunderstood. That's why it's called a path. And all this, your question tells me you're on the path. And I would say, just keep going. Don't assume. Don't manifest out of plans for some kind of a future. Just watch what occurs. Whatever occurs is actually telling you what you need, what you are looking for. It's saying it to you.
Is the manifestation ever incorrect?
Relatively, yes, but ultimately, no. Why aren't you laughing? Sorry, go ahead. I apologize. Please go ahead.
When I hear that, like that polarity, finally no.
Yeah.
So it still feels like there's a big part being missed in the perception of what is occurring.
No, you're seeing it. You're seeing it, but you're adding on that something's missed. You're seeing it, but because that doesn't live up to your standard of what that should look like. If you saw what it is you're looking for, it doesn't live up to it. So therefore, you lay on top of that. Well, that can't be. That must be off, or I must not be seeing it clearly. Can't be that simple. Yes, it is, and it's also incredibly hard to see because the imputation, the imaginary nature, along with the dependent nature and the imaginary nature, those things are very confusing. That's why we have that simple kind of the three natures. That's why we have that simple structure, so we can go in and just use those concepts. It's dependently arisen, and then we add on the imaginary, so to speak. And if you see that, then that's the ultimate nature or ultimate truth. Even though you're still embodied, you're still eating breakfast, you're still getting headaches, you're still having irritation at the traffic. But it doesn't happen to an individual anymore because there isn't anyone. It's not that there isn't something, but what there is, you're not separate from it. So every twig that moves on the tree, I'm not being romantic about this. It's very, very, very solid. It's as solid as the dirt that the trees are sticking out of. So I would say to you, based on your question, just keep going. It's like someone on the mountainside saying, how far to the top? And I would say, depending on who you were, who I was, and what part of the mountain we were on, I would say, who said there was a top? And then you would, or not. Or else you might say, oh, yeah, right. Oh, that's right. Okay. I'll keep going. More or less?
Plays on bowing. It's so difficult to have intense suffering and not think that
it is.
There should be something else. So I guess the question is, what is the completeness of just suffering, bowing?
The suffering is dependently arisen. The Buddha said, I wasn't there, but what I've been told, Buddha awoke and said, in his first teaching, as far as I know, and it could be, you could find something somewhere, said, no, he actually said this. It looks, and the way it's passed down through the lineage, through the centuries, is the Buddha awoke and began to teach his homies there, life is suffering. And this was not a pessimism. This is the truth. Life, you have nerve endings, lots of them, and they get abraded. And even when they're stroked or or given touch or smell or whatever, some kind of pleasure, that doesn't last. So the very instability of that pleasure gives us more suffering, because then it's called the pain of alternation. We see the bowl of ice cream is there, and now it's half gone. Uh-oh, won't be long, and that'll be totally gone. That sucks. And then there's no ice cream at all, which is pain and suffering, hunger, or however you want to characterize it. And it's the Buddha was saying, this is what's happening. And then he began to talk about all of that being, that's the provisional teachings that give us some kind of a structure, like the 12 links in the chain of existence. We said the Four Noble Truths, as we just talked about, and the 6 realms, the 5 skandhas, and on and on and on to all different kinds of the 3 natures, and so on, ways of understanding it. So give me a direct question coming out of your previous question. Direct as you can get it.
It's difficult because it feels like what is coming up is so unclear, so it's hard to formulate a clear question around.
So let me. Okay, so the suffering that comes up is what the ego mind is trying to get rid of the suffering, tries to cover up the suffering, because there's an assumption that we are somebody and we're the one who's suffering. But actually, the suffering is suffering. It's the very nature of dependent origination, of pratitya samutpada. It's the very nature of it. So we, instead of seeing our true nature, instead of stepping onto the spiritual path with some kind of a guide or person to help you do that, and a community, and the teaching, everything is dependently arisen, is the basic teaching with all kinds of elaborations on that. Instead, we either try to push it away by literally medicating ourselves, or even using a meditation to get rid of it. And if it doesn't work, then we think we have the wrong meditation, or we're not doing enough of it. That's why it's necessary to have the 3 jewels, as far as I see. I'm not saying you can't do it without that. There are a lot of spontaneous realizers. When I say a lot, a few dozen probably, that have realized this without any kind of strong path, because of the karma that brought them into this life stream. Shows up in such a way that they just get whacked enough that they suddenly realize there isn't anyone. And if you don't have any kind of training under that, that can be terrifying. It happened to U.G. Krishnamurti. He called his enlightenment was called the calamity. He didn't say that it was a brilliant view of the nature of fundamental reality. The same with Susan Segal. She went, instead of talking to meditation teachers, which she had done a little bit of meditation, she went around and talked to psychiatrists and therapists who tried to fix her instead of help her see what she was looking at, which was emptiness, the emptiness of self, the emptiness of other. So what happens, coming back to your question, I would say the suffering itself, if you can see that there's no one who's suffering, the feeling's going to be there. That feeling may come from now on, but this is what the Buddhists call bliss. You don't care whether you're suffering or not, because there's no self in the skandhas. There's no solid being. Realize it. I'll help you, or I'll push you. Realize your fundamental nature is not separate from the Tathagata. Not a romantic statement. It's in fact, it is quite ordinary. Nothing special, as Charlotte Joko Beck, I think, titled one of her books. Nothing special, but vast and profound at the same time. Again, not two. That's what this means. When you gasho, you're bringing relative and absolute together. And you're saying, thank you very much. Be grateful. So the very suffering that you're dealing with, another way to get rid of it is to blame someone. People right in our Sangha, very close students of mine, blame others for how they're feeling. And I'm not saying it isn't relatively true. Of course it is. This person said this, did this, whatever. And then you or even me, we're reacting. Oh my God, why don't they leave me alone? Or why do they treat me like that? Or don't they see how much I know? Or that's what I'm always saying. Don't you guys see what I know? Stop torturing me. The torturing belongs to no one. I'm not saying there isn't something happening there instead of a receiver, but there's no solid personhood there. It's called liberation. It's called liberation. And I can sit here and rattle on about it day in and day out. That's all I do these days is I want you to know about this. I'm here to do this because I am grateful beyond measure. So the difficulty may come up and may go away, may come up, but any attribution of cause and effect may be relatively true. But if you see who's causing what, it's like our legal system. I mean, it works because it's relative. But fundamentally, anybody, anytime there's a criminal act or an act of kindness, these are dependently arisen. We tend to go right to blame because we want to control everything. The one who sees there is no one doesn't really give a shit about control. Pardon my accent. We don't really care about it. We care some. I'm not saying we're totally throwing it out the window. We don't care whether the furnace works or whether the roof caves in or whether we eat. I'm not saying we go the other direction, but we don't have the petty mind about things starts to go away. And you can't just remove it. You can't just take your pettiness or your irritation with the neighbors or with your mate, for that matter, and do away with it. You have to see. When I say you have to, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe there's another way. But the way it looks here, you have to see there's no solid self in the skandhas. Form, feeling. What's the next one? Perception, concept of the thinking process, and consciousness of the six sense fields and their objects. That does not come together and hold hands and make up a person, an entity. But it looks like it does. And that entityhood or that personhood keeps going. If this body-mind collapses, that keeps going on. It's called a ghost. And you're not coming, who you actually are is not coming to an end, but who you think you are may terminate. Then you may spend 15 centuries in the ground or think you're in the ground. Or you may think you burned up in a flood or drowned in a fire.
Sokuzan, there's a question in the chat box from Ian Kleiman.
Go ahead, Ina.
Isn't suffering simply the consequence of not accepting the way things are? And then in quotations, it says versus pain.
A little bit of that, but you don't have to accept. I never say just accept it. Some teachers teach that way. I don't. Don't accept anything. Don't reject anything, and don't ignore it. Those are the three that the way I teach. You don't have to accept anything. If you say to yourself, I just got to accept this, you're just creating more circles. There isn't anyone to accept anything. So I would say knock it off. If you're listening to me, stop trying to accept stuff. And whatever rough and ready thing comes tumbling out of the closet and chases you down the hallway, don't fight with it. Don't agree with it. Don't disagree with it. Do nothing with it. See how much danger you're actually in. What is actually substantial, real, and fundamental and true? What goes to bed at night and lays there and drifts off into sleep is not threatened. I'm not saying you might think who you think you are might be threatened, but your consciousness is not threatened. It can't be threatened. Can't be but if you think you're somebody, if you think you're a body-mind complex, if you think this is me, then yeah, there can be some danger happening there because of the nerve endings, because of warm and cold and smooth and sharp. But you don't have to accept it. The elaboration on your question, I would have to hear it again, and I could probably go further into what you're leading up to, because you actually made a statement there and then said, isn't that true? And you're giving me a lot of credit for being smart, and I am not. I kind of know stuff. I'm not very smart. And I'm not just saying that for the hell of it. What do I see? I see this. I teach out of what I see, not out of what I know. When I get up, when we're done with this and I walk on the other room, I'm not some kind of or somebody who was just talking to a few dozen people about something. That doesn't tag around with me. The only way I know that I know something is somebody asks me a question. If you don't ask me any questions, I might not do too much.
Nice show, Bowing.
Nice show.
Is nihilism a form of or passion, Bowing?
Yeah, it's taking something because of our fear of not knowing, because over here, then we clamp down on it, and it may be the clamping down that actually functions as nihilism or intense negativity that makes us feel safer. Or it could be the comment on somebody else's activity that looks like nihilism. Like some people say Buddhism is nihilism. That's because they've never really looked at it. You can't look into Buddhism without practicing it. You can't just look at you can't just read the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and read, you can read Dogen from cover to cover. And you might come up with any number of things. You can read the Majjhima Nikaya, the Digha Nikaya, the Samyutta Nikaya, and think this is kind of nihilistic. Words of the Buddha, early words of the Buddha, Dhammapada. But it's not. He's looking at what this is, and out of his realization, out of his understanding, and bringing that realization into words and into concepts. And that's what I'm doing here to some extent. Can't compare myself with that ancient sage, but I'm just saying I'm functioning as a Dharma teacher. That's what I've studied. I had really good teachers and powerful Sangha or community that I supported this situation. So now I convert into words or language what I'm looking at. I don't even have to think about it. And I'm not saying I might not be better, but maybe I should think about it some more. But I don't plan much, a little bit. The only way I know about the three tenets is somebody reminds me what I said. The only one I can remember is the first one, and that's the one that haunts me the most. Haunting. You come to a conclusion about it, no more haunting. Now I know.
Maria Bank.
Yes, Maria.
Following Chezan's question, I'm wondering, this is actually a question which I ask myself, but at the same time, I'm wondering whether asking that kind of question is closing the search. Bowing.
The kind that Chezan asked?
Chezan asked a question about suffering,
Yeah.
the completeness of suffering.
Yes.
And in the light of your responses, I'm wondering whether it's closing the door for that answer. I'm wondering whether this is the vicious circle which I'm creating, asking questions like this.
I wouldn't call it vicious, but it has a circularity to it. But you don't have to stop that. You just have to see it. The circle will wind down itself, pump a bunch of fuel into one end of it. Just see the circular. And the other thing I would say is enjoy yourself. This is difficult, especially if you're being put upon by your job, your environment, your town, your politics, or the society. If you're being threatened by any of that, you don't have to end things. You don't have to end circularity. You just have to see it. You don't have to end passion, aggression, and ignorance, or pushing, pulling, and shutting down. If you see it, then it winds down. Because if you do it, if you accomplish it, then this is a very subtle, highly refined self-centeredness or narcissism that is found in another hideout in the skandhas.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Junshu bowing.
Yes, Junshu.
There's a question from Semi in Portland.
Semi?
She asks, what would our lives look like without relative ego?
A lot easier. And I would say things would shift. I can't be sure of this, but you probably would enjoy yourself a lot more because you would not be at odds with things. So when I say without ego, the ego could still be there. I sometimes say that the metaphor I sometimes use is ego. Once you've realized what it is, it might still hang around, but it's like a clown on the roof. And it wants control, most clowns do, or it wants to keep changing its costume until it gets your attention. But it's on the damn roof. Just don't invite it in. Don't give it any credential. Bundle of emotions. Say, look what I'm feeling. And also don't fight with it, don't discount it, or don't chase it away. Let it hang around. It's unreal. The skandhas that form the self-centeredness is unreal. It is just not substantial. And therefore you can be, if you make friends with that, which is my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, make friends with that. If you make friends with that, you don't have any enemies, because you see everyone, the most terrible, enraged attack on you, this is the only way that, because of their causes and conditions, the only way they can get out of their suffering is to try to dump it on you. This is what wars are about. The one person, because of their karma, because of the interaction between the society and so on, they just fall in line, where they just rise to the top, because the one who was there around 30 years ago wasn't stopped and was promoted, because people are greedy and they want the help of that so-called oligarch. So that's why they get supported. An oligarch can't do anything by themselves, including ego. If you don't do anything with it, don't get rid of it. Sometimes they say transcend it. I think that's too fancy. I wouldn't do anything with it. Listen, if you hear the ego, the self-centered mind saying something, or you're feeling a bunch of emotions that are coming up around some kind of self-centeredness, where you feel like you're being challenged by somebody or threatened by somebody. This is it's your mind. It's your mind. Nobody's dumping anything into you. It's your mind that has been downloaded into this living form we call a human being. This is a powerful situation. Don't miss your life. Don't waste your life. Death comes without warning, and there's no guarantee you'll be a human being again, where you can live in a realm that the Buddha actually said what he said. The Buddha actually taught there is a living Buddha, and there is a living tradition of the Buddha's teaching. You could be born you could be born an alien. Don't believe anything I say, but you might want to consider it. Consciousness is arising everywhere all the time, not just this little ball of dirt around a bigger ball of fire in the middle of nowhere. The nowhere is vast, and there are probably countless kinds of consciousnesses all over, not just us here, and animals and raccoons and ducks and birds and things. But I'm saying right here, there's more consciousnesses, more forms of entityhood that you can't see. The world is completely haunted. Just a way of talking about it.
Kevin bowing.
Hi, Kevin.
You've talked quite a bit about deep consciousness and
I do.
the unseen realms. Does a lot of sitting practice make us more susceptible to connecting with those unseen realms? Bowing.
Not necessarily. The causes and conditions that arise as any given being are so complicated that there's no guarantee of anything. You could sit a lot and never attain realization, but it might be a good idea to do it. This is our idea of time is very short. We're here, and we think this is going to last so long. You could start. You may not realize what this is. And as far as deep consciousness, that's a vast and all over the place, and all kinds of forms are showing up. There's a good chance that if you want to look in that area, that you can. If that's something that interests you, then I can help you there. Not because I'm such a big know-it-all in that area, but because I don't know. It's because I don't know, not because I know. And if you have questions around that, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Earlier, you mentioned that we've all met many times before. Here, I think you said, "Here we are again."
Yes, I did.
And then, in other contexts, particularly around working with difficult emotions, you've kind of encouraged us to look at when we say, "There I go again."
Yes.
And I'm curious about what it is that's showing up in the first example of "Here we are again" that is not showing up when we're inclined to say "There I go again."
They kind of rhyme a little bit. 2 lines of a very short poem. Here we are again. There I go again. Here I am. Here we are again. There. So one of them is all about us guys. So the "here we are again" is a way of saying we have a connection that goes way beyond our intellectual connection, which may be something like, I think I want to listen to this guy some more, or I think this person makes sense, or he makes sense here, but over here. So, but we're here we are together. There's a couple dozen people here, or maybe more or less, I don't know. And we're together, just like people who have been students of mine for many years. Here we are again. But I feel when I meet somebody, just about anybody, I have some kind of connection with everyone I meet, and it isn't some kind of a woo-woo feeling like some kind of otherworldly thing. I just know people. I don't see any strangers. I see people that look different, but they don't seem like strangers, even when they're all tied up in knots over their opinions, their ideas, their politics, and etc. And when I say here I go again, that is that teaching or that idea about that tends to reify the self-centeredness that is having difficulty with a particular dynamic in the consciousness that is maybe being jealous or going into some kind of depression or some kind of anxiety and almost kind of fueling it because of the fighting against it. Here I go again. Or it could be anything from something very simple and mental like that to an actual migraine. And I'm not saying the migraine is something you can stop, but sometimes our way of working with that is more about fighting with it, shutting it down, covering it up, rather than using that as some kind of to help our understanding deepen. So to say, here I go again is, I would say, don't say that. But when I say don't say that, I know you can't help that. You're bound to continue to say that some, but the awareness that watches that or observes that will probably be more clear about that dynamic. You'll be more clear about your actually, like when I say don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't look away. I can't help do that. So you're probably going to do it. But if I say that, then there seems to be more clarity around the simplicity of just pushing, aggression, just pulling, passion, or just adding on something that happens, the belief in it, that you believe that that's true. So I would say, take your time. The paramita for that is called patience. And it's not about waiting for something. Patience is not waiting for something. Looks like it though, doesn't it?
Bowing.
Yes.
Another question from YouTube. This is from Dorje Tenzin. Is the object of meditation while doing zazen Buddha nature?
The object of meditation while doing zazen Buddha nature? I think conceptually you could probably go that direction. I don't use that particular way of talking about it, but you could say that. Buddha nature means awakened nature. So in some sense, when you sit down, when 15 people sit down, they're all in different areas of how to work with the mind. But fundamentally, yes, there isn't anything to do. Fundamentally, there isn't anything but Buddha. There isn't anything but awake. Nothing sleeps anywhere. It's not an opinion. And you could even do whatever you want with it. Disagree with it. I won't mind. And I will not debate with you about that, because debate has a structure to it that has to do with relative proof. And I'm interested in relative proof, but only insofar as those stair steps lead to a cliff. And that's relative speaking, because it's not actually a cliff. It's like has been said in the past by other teachers. It feels like a fall, but you never hit. There isn't anything to hit bottom. There is no bottom. But the terror of self-centeredness thinks, this is not good. I think I'm falling. I have no reference point. And I would say, go ahead and do it anyway. So when you sit down, Dorje Tenzin, and you look at the nature of the mind, for you or for anyone else, it may show up as a solidity that has holes in it, or something that has all kinds of holes in it that is very solid. It's going to show up, have some kind of a relative dynamic until it does not. And when I say until, I'm just saying we're in a relative world, so I can use words like that, like until. Fundamentally, if you stop covering it up, you're, as it says in the teachings of Dzogchen, Mahamudra teachings, it's already the case. It's already the great perfection. If you see that, you see there isn't anything else to do. As my teacher Kobunjin Roshi said, translating the Diamond Sutras, or the Heart Sutras, Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisattva is falling apart, falling apart, falling apart, nothing to do, everything all at once. And what was falling apart? The construct that we call me and the world, that just falls apart. It just comes apart. It doesn't mean that the world goes away. It's not just, it's no longer something else, something other. The duality or that separation is gone. And if the separation shows up 10 minutes later, the separation is also part of that which is not separate. You can't get rid of it. If you awaken, which I hope you do, it can't go away. It's not an experience. Sometimes people say, so what was it like when you, I don't know if they have the balls to say when you awoke. They might, pardon my accent again. Nobody awoke.
Kozan bowing.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, Kozan.
That last question reminded me of a verse from the 30 verses. And it says something like, as long as consciousness is not situated in this only, the grasping of a subject and the grasping of an object will not cease. So how could we be sitting without intending to strengthen the belief in an observer or a subject? Bowing.
Yes, you're doing it right now. Right now. You're strengthening that. Give me another question.
So how can we not do that?
See the way you do it. Just observe it. And because it is dependently arisen, because it is an illusion, by just observing that without accepting it, there's passion and aggression, and without turning away or ignoring it. That's what the sitting practice of meditation, at least the way I teach it, shikantaza, sit down, hold still, all the senses are on receive, watch what moves. Whatever continues to move, that's your path. That is your practice. No matter how wonderful, how evil, what's a daydream or you're falling asleep, correct nothing. There's nothing to correct. That's a masculine idea that comes out of ancient macho traditions where they all felt like they had to hit people with sticks and stuff. Just a misunderstanding, but it led to a lot of men trying to push people around. Just a description. I'm not blaming men. I happen to be one. But the cultural situation, the context there is that you've got to force something. You have to hit somebody with a stick. You have to sit there in a box until you awaken some kind of a weird understanding of discipline that all it does is continue to make the whole damn thing rotate and rotate. All you have to do really is hold still, but not maintain it. And as far as live up to some kind of standard of discipline where this person's never moves, that must mean I have to do that. No, you don't. You don't have to maintain anything. If you don't understand, I'm here.
Bowing. We have 3 questions in the chat box.
Go ahead.
First one, Ian Kleiman, and he says, where does compassion come in?
Wisdom, or seeing the truth. When wisdom sees wisdom, there isn't anything but compassion. So one is no longer, compassion is not a feeling. A feeling is feeling sorry for someone or sad or some kind of a relative thing if someone is less than you. And then they need your care. And I'm not saying that isn't valuable. There are people who function that way all the time. They want to help all the suffering people, all the hurt animals, and all the and sometimes that's actually has a lot of valid actual, you could call it compassion. But a lot of times the people, it's all about themselves. They want to be. So one of the ways they can feel better about themselves without actually seeing the nature of ego is to serve others and be the person, the nurse to their doctor. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing you for doing that. We need that. But I'm just saying that sometimes one is doing that so one gets a credential out of it that protects you from ever actually stepping on the spiritual path because you feel like you're on one. You feel like you're one who is serving. And I'm not saying you aren't. I'm not saying that you should ever step on the spiritual path. That is your business. It's your karma, your life, your death, your dependent origination. Do whatever you need to do. If you need my help, I'd be happy to respond. I have nothing to sell. There are no advertisements for this other than, if you're here, I would say you might want to train your mind to see what's true rather than believing your ideas, your thoughts, your opinions, your conclusions, your exclusions, or anything. Any elaboration on any of this leads to circles. So the compassion that we're talking about as far as wisdom mind, the wisdom doesn't see anything else. So therefore, as Avalokiteshvara, the metaphor or the metaphorical being who looked down and heard the cries of the world, and tears came out of Avalokita's eyes and became white Tara, green Tara, and all those other elaborations that use images to actually talk about how wisdom and compassion are not two different things. But compassion is not a feeling. It might have some kind of attendant feeling with it. I'm not saying that you'll be some kind of a bump on a log or some kind of stoic person who just is very compassionate but never has any emotions. Misunderstand. You might be very emotional. You might be hit with so much emotion you might not be able to stand up. Come to conclusions about nothing.
Sokuzan is from William Murray.
Yes, William.
Where is the mind when not downloaded into a body?
That's kind of a generic kind of thing. I don't know, talking about a specific consciousness or something like that. I'm not sure what you want to know. I mean, if I enter into that and, I can sort something out for you, but what is it you want to know? And then I can respond to that rather than bring me into that kind of esoteric structure. Where is the mind? I'm not mocking you or making fun of you. I'm just saying that, I don't know. Is there a mind? Is there something does that have some kind of status as a thing?
Sokuzan, the third question is from Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Do you have any suggestions for practicing shikantaza? The other day, I heard you say, sit still and see what moves. If I have that right, is there anything else about that you could offer?
Yes, set up a schedule, do it regularly, and try to sit for longer periods of time occasionally. I've actually done that where you can sit every day, start with a sound, end with a sound. Don't use a smartphone. Not that the smartphones are so bad right now, but they're getting worse. Eventually they'll be telling you your heart rate and how good your meditation was and how you should not be meditating this way. You need another posture. It's getting artificial intelligence becomes more and more intrusive. So use a analog clock. So you actually see something move, not just numbers show up, or symbols, or sounds, or you make your own sound and look at your timepiece, and then just generally speaking, sit an hour a day, 2 hours a day, whatever you can manage if you have work or family situations, and try to do it consistently. And also notice that you can't do it consistently without adding on that I'm bad or I shouldn't be doing. Just do the best you can. Don't set up standards, but also don't ignore that whole thing where you don't have some kind of a form. That's not necessarily a standard. To observe a form is not to obey it. That's a misunderstanding, and it goes way back. The macho, masculine kind of thing goes way back. You have to mind. You have to do it. It's just a misunderstanding. I had to labor under that for years to be able to see that this probably not a good idea to do that. I almost broke my legs in 1980 when I refused to move out of my own masculine stubbornness. I spent 3 years sitting in a chair. I couldn't get back to a cushion. So set up a time to sit, 7 a.m. till 8 or something like that. Strike a bell. If you need to do something like a sutra, something like that, there's all kinds of them that are out there. Our monastery has all kinds of sutras on it. You can incorporate one of those or not. You might want to do a simple gesture, bow to your cushion. If you have an image of the Buddha, bow to the Buddha. Sit down, hold still. And then try to also, you can do what I call block sitting. Take a 4-hour block of sitting, not 3, not quite enough. 4-hour block of sitting, and strike the bell. 4 hours later, get up and watch the movement that happens in that time. It may not be any. You may be just sitting there doing shikantaza, observing what moves, thoughts, emotions, memories, plans to build a cabin in the North Woods, how to work harder on your Portuguese lessons. I mean, it could be anything you're working with, that you're just, whatever shows up in the mind stream. The important thing is hold still without being rigid. If you hold very still, body, mind are not two separate things. They just look like it. And the one thing you have say so about a little bit is the body. Hold it still. And don't do anything with the mind. No mantras, no visualizations, other than the ones that come up spontaneously. So just receive, just receive. Eventually that tends to die down. It takes a while. And then do the block sitting. And in the block sitting, you also endeavor, the primary thing is to hold still for the 4 hours. Pretty hard to do. So you might, after half an hour, you might get up and go have a sandwich, or you might have a cup of tea, or you might glance out the window for a few minutes. That's still movement. Some trainings tend to separate between sitting still of the body. I say endeavor to sit the body still, but don't get macho with it. Don't get overly masculine. Be gentle with your body. And this might mean you might have to get up every 5 or 10 minutes. But if you set up that schedule, so you strike the bell, 4 hours later, you strike the bell again, that's the form that you observe. And so how do you observe that form? You observe whatever moves. And that may be your body getting up and going to the can and coming back. But your primary interest, because you're even inspired to even do this, that's going to be enough. That'll carry you through. And study, depending on what you need, study the teachings. They can be just, you could read the Dhammapada. You could read the teachings of my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. You could read, Koben has one book, a teacher of mine. You could read Suzuki Roshi. You could read Katagiri Roshi. You could read the Tibetan masters, Khenpo Kartar. I mean, there's so many things you can read. You're probably going to find one book I mentioned earlier by Charlotte Joko Beck, Nothing Special. And Everyday Zen is another one of hers. It's beautiful. She's passed away now. It was a beautiful way of working with this, a very ordinary way of doing it that still did not completely water down the teachings of the Buddha.
Joko bowing. 2 more questions in the chat box. One is a follow-up from William.
Yes, William.
You mentioned earlier seeing what this is while the mind is downloaded when not downloaded into this body.
Well, it's probably waiting for another body, or it's finding some other kind of a form. So when we talk about the mind, we're talking about some kind of aspect of consciousness that has a kind. When we talk about this, we're talking about an individual. So we're talking about some kind of sovereignty. I don't call it a soul. Well, some traditions do say maybe. I think that if you see that there's some kind of sovereign quality to it or singularity to it, but it doesn't have, it's not concerned with time and space. It doesn't believe or disbelieve. So another way of referring to it is as Buddha nature, or the awakened nature that's showing up as an apparent with the ability to become an entity or to come into this physical realm. This is like a huge school. So like these, it's like there's a bunch of angels out there, to put it literally, to tell a story. And some of them want more training. So they come into this realm, and this is a difficult school. And some people you meet are angels, and they know it. If they're preaching, they're not angels. When I say angels, I'm talking about light beings who are incarnated. Do I believe this? No, I don't believe anything. I don't believe anything. It's not a bragging point. I'm just saying that anything can happen. Anything can show up. Is there?
The next question.
Go ahead, please.
E?
Who?
Pete.
Pete?
Pete.
Okay, go ahead, Pete.
Is there merit in sitting? What is merit?
I don't know. Hard to say. But yeah, I would say there's insofar as I understand merit, I don't use that too much because it's like you get the teaching concept quite a bit. Not against it, but I think it's the merit that it's kind of hard to see that because it's not something you can particularly create. You wouldn't be here listening to someone, some old man talk about the teachings of the Buddha unless there was a whole lot of merit going on in your life. You can't just do this because I think I'll check this out kind of thing. It doesn't mean you'll ever come back here again. And I have no requirements of anything. So, but I would say, as I understand your question, a simple response to that, probably the most direct, is yes, absolutely, and fundamentally, and relatively. There's complete merit. There isn't anything but merit. There isn't anything but sitting. There isn't anything but Buddha.
And now we can dedicate the merit.
Unyo said, what did you say? She's very bossy today.
We can now dedicate the merit.
She said we can now dedicate the merit. Okay. So, in the monastery, they're gonna, I think, dedicate. There they are.
May the merit of this
Penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji san ji ji hu shi tong sa mo sa mo ko ja ho the 10 directions, the created worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.